Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Golan. I'm executive director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And welcome to this, I want to say, fifth edition of Life, the Universe, and Humanistic Judaism, which is our rabbis and cantors series where we hear from folks who are leaders in our movement about what they want to talk about. And it's been a really great learning journey so far. And I know that's going to continue today. And as I always mention, this is a benefit of membership in Humanistic Judaism, whether you're a member of one of our local affiliated communities or whether you're an online independent member of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. We can't do what we do without your membership and your support. So thank you very much for that. And this is a small way for us to kind of give back and say thanks for being a part of our movement. For your friends and family who are not yet members, these will be posted to YouTube later, but they don't get to participate live and be part of the community and ask questions. Today, we have with us Rabbi Dr. Tzemah Yoreh, who is leader of the City Congregation for Humanistic Judaism in New York City. And he has been a student of the Bible since his earliest days, winning the Diaspora Division of the International Bible Contest in childhood. He attended the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where he obtained his PhD in biblical criticism in record time. He earned a second PhD in ancient wisdom literature at the University of Toronto. Rabbi Yoreh is a prolific writer and has authored many books, including Why Abraham Murdered Isaac, the first stories of the Bible revealed, and So Compassionate It Hurts, My Life as a Rabbi on the Spectrum. So I will hand it over to you, Tzemah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paul. So I obviously enjoy talking about why Abraham murdered Isaac, the story of the sacrifice, and you're going to hear more about it today. So, but just before I launch right into it, just a little bit about how I'm going to be presenting this. So the title of this is the most important story in the Hebrew Bible. First, we'll give the candidates for other, for importance. What are which are the most important stories? Then I will go ahead and talk about how they shape and influence history. I'll talk through the lens of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and then go on to some secular history as well. Okay, so let's go right into it. So what are some of the candidates for the most important story in the Hebrew Bible? Well, there are a few of them. One you could talk about the story of Adam and Eve, the story of creation. Very well-known story, influences notions of original sin, of gender hierarchy, all kinds of things. Very, very well known. But I don't think it's the most influential. Then there's Noah and the flood, also even better known story maybe, but like two animals, a flood overtaking humanity, one that has lots of parallels and lots of different religions. It has resonance today with with global warming and water's overwhelming and apocalypse and such, and it's also it's a resonant story, and but I do not think it is the most influential. So the most serious candidate, I think, is the story of the Exodus. We tell that story every year at Passover. It is the central Jewish myth, the myth of of coming out from slavery and redemption. It influences lots of liberation movements. In our own history, the liberation, the African American story of liberation from slavery, and it is perhaps the best known story. But in terms of its historical, how it's worked in history, I think there is one story that is even greater than the story of the Exodus, and that is the story that I've devoted a lot of my scholarly life talking about and writing about, the story of why Abraham murdered Isaac, or the sacrifice of Isaac, or the binding of Isaac. It's known in it's known in a number of ways. So you know, what I'll do right now, first I will give you the background to the story. It appears in the book of Genesis in chapter 22. We will talk about how how the characters interacted with each other until that moment, and then we will look at that story more closely, and then we'll discuss the implications of that story. So it appears the story appears relatively early on in the Hebrew Bible. Genesis is the first book of the Hebrew Bible. We have the myth of creation that preceded it, the myth of the flood that precedes it. After the flood, one particular son of Noah is chosen to as a someone who will perpetuate a particular view of religion. And that is his son Shem, from whence we have the term Semites, and and the idea of anti-Semitism. And Shem is the great grandfather 10 times removed of Abraham. Abraham is born in the east in Mesopotamia, in modern day Iraq. He takes a long journey. First comes to Syria, in the land of Aram, in modern in biblical times. And then his family stays there for a while. His father dies there. But according to the story, the God character goes and tells Abraham, "No, your journey is not done. You go to the land of Canaan." And so he goes to the land of Canaan, has lots of adventures, mostly misadventures. Tries to present his wife as his sister, and kind of acts, in a very important way. Yet the guy character remains in his camp. He rewards him for that, for the way he treats his wife. And then, but he does not have children until very late in life. His first son, he has one son, Ishmael, at age 86, after being in Canaan for 10 years. And then he has, when he reaches his 99th year, he is promised a son through Sarah, his wife. And when he is 100 years old, he has a son, Isaac. So this is his only son with Sarah. Sarah is his wife. Ishmael is born from Hagar. Hagar is Sarah's handmaiden from Egypt. So, not a secondary son in the biblical conception of things. And then one day, fairly out of the blue, God commands Abraham to sacrifice his son. Now I'm going to tell that story of Abraham sacrificing his son, and many of you are familiar with it, but I think since we're going to be focusing our lens on this story, it behooves us to actually read it, to look at it. So I'm going to share the screen, and we are going to look at Genesis 22. Here we go. So I'm going to read out the story and offer some explanations. So give me a second here. Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test, saying to him, "Abraham," and he answered, "Here I am." Why did God put Abraham to the test? Why, we do not know. I tried to explain it in my book, Why Abraham Murdered Isaac, and you're very welcome to go ahead and read that. But that's not what's going to occupy us today. But presenting it, out of context, just chapter 22 on its own, the reason for God doing this is not obvious at all. Take your son, your favorite one, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. So this doesn't make any sense at all in its context. It is comes out of the blue. And really for a son that was promised, and his only son through Sarah. This is a really odd, counterintuitive, uh, very painful request. So early next morning, Abraham saddled his ass and took with him two of his servants, his son Isaac. He split the wood for the burnt offering, and he set out for the place of which God had told him. So Abraham, despite this horrible request, goes and does what God asks him. And this is very significant. We don't hear none of the emotional turmoil that we are used to, say, in modern literature, appears here. We don't know what Abraham is going through. We're not privy to any of that. The biblical storytelling is full of action. It's not very. It doesn't really tell us a lot about motivations. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his servants, "You stay here with the ass. The boy and I will go up there. We will worship, and we will return to you." Notice here that he's talking in the plural. We will worship. We will return to you. So he is lying to Isaac, not telling him the purpose of this pilgrimage. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on his son Isaac. He himself took the firestone and the knife, and the two walked off together. So they're walking together, father and son. Very poignant image, but Abraham has murder in his heart. Then Isaac said to his father, "Abraham, father," and he answered, "Yes, my son." He said, "Here are the firestone and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering?" Isaac is an astute young man. He's asking, "Well, we don't have a sheep here. What are you planning to do?" But Abraham said, "It is God who will see to the sheep for this burnt offering, my son." And the two walked them together. This is like a deflection. God will provide. God will provide. That's a literary deflection. They arrived at the place on which God had told them. Abraham built an altar there. He laid out the wood, and then now he just starts with this violent act. He bound his son Isaac. He laid him on the altar on top of the wood. So we have to presume that Isaac here is a boy, not a man, because otherwise, how would he have laid down for this act? His father's about to kill him. But his father is 100 years old, according to the story. So he would have to be a child for Abraham to overcome him. And Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. So here we're at the high point or the low point from a moral standpoint of the story. Abraham picked up the knife to slay his son. Then the messenger of Yahweh Adonai called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham," and he answered, "Here I am." So there is intervention over here at the last moment, right before Abraham kills Isaac. And an angel comes, tells him from heaven, "Do not raise your head against the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your favored one, from me." So here, this is Abraham proved himself as a man of absolute faith in God. Was willing to take the ultimate step in the ancient world. In ancient Israel, sacrificing your firstborn is the ultimate act of faith, not only in this story, but we have indication of this in other parts of the Hebrew Bible as well. When Abraham looked up, his eye fell upon a ram caught in the thicket by its thorns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. So God does provide, just like Abraham said he would to Isaac, but that was a lie then, and now it's the truth. And Abraham named that site Adonai Yoreh, what's the present saying, "On the mount of Adonai there is a vision." The messenger of Adonai called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I swear, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes." So Abraham is being richly rewarded for this act of supreme faith. Uh, of course, we who read this as literature can see this in a somewhat different lens, meaning we see the God character here as asking Abraham to perform an act that we would deem absolute evil, and Abraham acceding to that request. So it really depends on your point of view. But in a world where there you know, everybody was believing, gods were part of just part of the world. This is seen in a different lens. This is seen as an act of faith, of faith in God, and it's seen as something noble. It's a little hard for us as modern readers to see it as something noble, but I'm asking you to stretch your imagination. Okay, all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants because you have obeyed my command. Okay, now we're going to quickly segue from the biblical text, but here I want to draw your attention to the final verse of this story, and it is a very, very interesting verse. Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together from Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Why do I think this verse is so interesting? This verse suggests a different ending to the story. Why does it suggest a different ending to the story? Because Abraham is returning alone from the mountain, and it was emphasized a few times in the story that Abraham and Isaac went together. So Abraham and Isaac go together. Abraham returns alone. If we were to read, skip to the end of the story from from verse 9 or so, we would presume that Abraham has indeed sacrificed his son, and that is so that is a possibility that I certainly think that is the original version of the story as I write in my books and such, but that I'm definitely not the first person who thought that was the original version of the story, or that that possibility at least suggested itself. So there, this is has a very long history of interpretation and imagination. This story is imagined as ending differently, of Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Of course, you could ask, well, if Abraham sacrifices Isaac, then how does the story continue? Isn't Isaac supposed to give supposed to beget Jacob and so on until the children of Israel are born and and become the people of Israel? So yes, that is all true. But we're just looking at this story by itself, and this story and this verse suggests a different ending. This verse suggests a different possibility, and those two possibilities: the possibility that either Abraham uh, there was intervention, and God saved Abraham, and there wasn't intervention, that God did not save Isaac, and that Abraham went through with it, are possibilities that are very strong readings of the text, and percolate throughout history in very interesting ways. So let me stop the share, because we've looked at the biblical story. So I want to talk a little bit about how this percolates in ancient Judaism, and then we will turn to Christianity and Islam as well. So in ancient Judaism, this story, we read, reimaginations of this story later on from the, I would say, first, second century of the Common Era onwards. They really considered, one of they really held in their minds the possibility that Abraham went ahead with this and sacrificed his son Isaac, and we see rereadings of this story in that particular way in early rabbinic literature. And we see this idea of dying, for dying because for faith, dying because God, to show your devotion to God, or to a religious idea is one that you see is it starts resonating in Judaism, in early Judaism, already in the Maccabean period. So, what is the Maccabean period? The Maccabean period is starts in the 2nd century before the Common Era, in the 160s before the Common Era, and you see stories of martyrdom. What kind of stories of martyrdom? Like this is stories where where Jews were asked to bow down to idols and they refused, and they were killed because of that. And dying, and there you have stories about dying for a particular idea. And those stories have a deep, deep resonance for Jews who are, in the scheme of things, a restive and persecuted nation at the same time. And another example is during the Crusades, where there was an awful bloodletting of Jews. Parents would kill their children rather than have their children convert to or be forcibly converted to Christianity. And they would invoke the story of Isaac and his preparation and Abraham's willingness to sacrifice him for the sake of religious ideals, for belief in God. So you have purposeful killing of children where children could have been saved. You have purposeful killing of children so that they would not become Christians during the Crusades. This also can be taken in another direction. Thankfully, we don't have all these stories of martyrdom in Judaism. We also have stories of people valuing life, value to a very high extent. And so, we have plenty of sayings as such to that effect. Anybody who saves a person, in any person in the world, it's as if they saved the entire world. And so there you see the value of life. And you also have the ideal that a court which kills a human being once in 70 years is a cruel court. So there's this ideal this ideal that one should not kill at all. If and so and that ideal trumps this notion that ideal trumps everything. And so that idea is present in Judaism as well. But it and we are very much composed of a nation. We Jews today are very much here because of our ancestors who chose to survive and to make compromises, and not die for particular ideas, rather to survive. And so and those two ideas are very much at war with each other. This sanctity, the sanctity of faith, the willing to die for faith, the willing to live and make compromises. And so, very famous in the history of this is Maimonides, who in his time there was forcible conversion to Islam, and so in most cases, Muslims would tolerate Jews in their domains, and would let them live if they paid a certain tax. But in some of the more extreme sects of Islam, sometimes in certain places, it was never universal. Really advocated for forcible conversion of anybody in their path, forcible conversion or death. And so the rabbis of that period were at odds around the status of somebody who converted to Islam to save their life and whether they could rejoin the Jewish community. And Maimonides, perhaps the greatest of the Jewish rabbis of the Middle Ages, um, ad, advocated very strongly that anyone who converted to Islam could rejoin the Jewish community. And this had to do with the similarities between Islam and Judaism, but more to the point, it had to do with the value of surviving, value of human life. And so you see here that at least some you know that this idea had resonance. The idea of the sanctity of life had resonance. The horrible tableau of parents killing their children, lest they could lest they be raised Christian, is one that it seems like Maimonides would not have condoned or thought well of. So this is a little bit of how it resonates in Jewish history. How does it resonate in Christianity and Islam? So um, so my second PhD was in early Christianity, University of Toronto. So I got to study, I got to study the New Testament. I was very interested in studying the New Testament. And I much preferred my first PhD to my second PhD because in my first PhD, I got to study the stories from the Hebrew Bible from a literary perspective. I'm going to be very biased here and say that I enjoyed the stories of the Hebrew Bible much more than I enjoyed the stories in the New Testament. And that has to do with the fact that there are the literary craftsmanship in the Hebrew Bible is much more in evidence than it is in the New Testament. In the New Testament, there are a fair number of short stories. There is one major story, and that is the story of the Passion of Jesus Christ, the story of Jesus dying on the cross, and that story is a literary it's a literary develops literarily at least from the story of the sacrifice of Isaac. How so? So some of you may be familiar with the story of the Passion, but it's Jesus is being led to his death willingly or unwillingly. It's sometimes there's a question about that. And to die for as an act of faith, for the sake of that faith. And that's the model. The father command in this. God takes the dual role. God is both, the commander and the father of Jesus, because Jesus is seen as the Son of God. Um, and but one of the differences, one of the key differences in the story is that we see a little bit about we see a little of Jesus' anguish. Like he's on the cross, he says, "God, God, why have you forsaken me?" While he is on the cross, and so we see that the turmoil that obviously is a big part of the pathos of the story is a little bit more evident in the version of the New Testament. But there's also, again, just like this with the story of Isaac, there are two choices, and the Christian version of the story likes to keep both of those possibilities alive. So Jesus dies, but he also lives. Jesus nailed to the cross and dies, and then he is resurrected. So here they have their cake and eat it too, just like Isaac, in Genesis 22, Isaac both lives, and then in verse 19 of that story, there's a possibility that he dies. The New Testament likes to keep us on our toes, and he has two of those possibilities in mind. The story of early Christianity is a story of martyrdom, people willing to die for their faith, to be Christians despite the persecution. And that is like, slowly but surely they become, in the third and fourth centuries, become a plurality of the citizens of the Roman Empire, maybe not the citizens, but the inhabitants of the Roman Empire. And then there's Emperor Constantine, and then they really win the day. But the story of early Christianity is a story of martyrdom, dying for one's faith, in emulation of Jesus, and in emulation of Abraham, and Isaac. And this is something that this has a lot of resonance. These martyrs become very important figures in the early church as symbols, as saints, as role models. The, I told the story of the Crusades a little while ago. Um, the Christian version of the Christian part of the Crusades is they were the instigators of the Crusades. It's a holy war, a Christian holy war. But this notion of holy war, of course, was, the leaders of the church had to rouse the troop, rouse and rile up the troops. And one of the ways they did it is by subverting the notion of martyrdom. And the notion of martyrdom becomes, you don't, it's not only to die for your faith, it's to kill for your faith. So if you die in battle with the infidel, with the Muslims and Jews, then that is as though you are a martyr. So we can see that notion of martyrdom gets subverted. That's really not the only time we're going to see that notion subverted, but it is a very important shift that occurs right in the First Crusade, and it shapes how the Crusades are fought. And so you see, that is entirely warped. Then let's talk a little bit about Islam as well. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. I see that the chat is full. So what about Islam? So in Islam, Abraham is the man of faith in Islam as well. And in Islam, we have the story of the sacrifice of Abraham's son. The son of Abraham is not identified in the Quran. There are two possibilities, of course. It's Ismail or Ishaq. It depends. If you're an early Muslim, it was Ishaq. If you're a later Muslim, it was Ismail. At least according to Hadith, the commentary on Islam. But in the Quran itself, it's the son is not identified. And Abraham is commanded to sacrifice his son. The son is given news of this, is told of this, and the son agrees to it. So this is different than what we have in the Hebrew Bible. There's no agreement from Isaac. Isaac is non-consenting, a non-consenting party to it. In the story, in the Muslim story, the son consents to this. So that's different. That kind of takes that at least is a more an easier story to stomach. At least there is this person agrees to be killed. Although for us it's of course, wow, like you're doing this because your father told you that God spoke to him. You were going to go ahead and be led to sacrifice. But yes, that is indeed the story. But of course, the story ends the same way as it does in the Hebrew Bible, with God intervening and saving the son. This becomes a very important in Islam. It becomes the source of one of the two major holidays in their calendar, Eid al-Adha, the holiday of the sacrifice, and which celebrates the God, celebrates Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son, and God saving the son, and providing a replacement for the sacrifice. And so it's a holiday which you eat a lot of meat at, and it's a very happy time. Um, okay, so that is like, it's obviously influenced the Muslim religion, but it also influenced a less benign part of Islam, and that is the notion of jihad. Just like we had the Christian Crusades, we also have the notion of holy war in Islam, and the idea of the what Islam means is submission. So actually, like, Abraham is the role model, the model of faith, the man who submitted himself in the most perfect way to God's will, and his supreme act of submission was his willingness to sacrifice his son. And so this is really the war of jihad is, it's like you're submitting yourself to God's will, and and really bringing others to the understanding that God is great, and that you should worship Him. And that is part of the jihad, part of bearing, part of the notion of holy war is really tied in to the to faith, to the absolute conviction that you are right. So a few words about how how the story influences other parts of history, not just major religions. I'm really bringing a summary. I actually devoted at one point taught a whole course on just this story, and you can very easily, and how it develops. But the idea of dying for something greater than yourself, for dying for an ideal, is something that is deeply influenced in history by this notion of dying for faith, dying for God. And so you have like these sayings, for God and for country, in all kinds of uh, when people are called to go to war for the United States, and so God is always, God is invoked, as part of the uh, calling to a greater service, right? And then this is in the United States, which is a deeply religious country, but this idea of invoking God and another ideal, for God or for country, for is a powerful one, and really does shape people's willingness to die for something greater than themselves, at least for people with religious inclinations. Okay, so I'm sure I'm going to leave it over here, and I'm leaving some like 18 minutes now for questions, and I'm going to hand over the mic to Paul, who will tell me which questions I should go ahead and answer. You are muted, Paul.
Thanks. That was excellent. Thank you. Very fascinating. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. I have one myself, but I will first go to the chat. Rabbi Eva Goldfinger asks, isn't it strange that Abraham was willing to argue with God to save the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, but not to save his own son?
It is indeed interesting. We see that the notion of mercy seems to extend to people that are that are not his family. But when it comes to his own family, he's very cruel and uncompromising. That is a deep irony in the story. I entirely agree.
And Alan Malkus asks, does the notion of jihad predate the crusade? And he also asked, and he also asked whether the idea of jihad, let me find the right question, but whether the idea of dying for God originates with jihad.
Dying for God. No, I mean it originates. It originates much earlier for that in early Jewish history. With, as I said, with in the book of Maccabees, you see in the books of Maccabees, you see Jews unwilling to bow down to idols, and die for God, for their faith, and that is seen as a role model, and taken as inspiration. The Jews who killed their children during the Crusades, lest they be raised Christian, invoked those role models, and not only Abraham and Isaac, but also the role models of Hannah and her 7 sons, and other stories of martyrdom.
And did you answer whether jihad predates the Crusades, or was that?
Jihad does predate the Crusades, because objectively speaking, the Muslim rise predates the Crusades, and jihad is an early Muslim idea. The Crusades are a little later in the Middle Ages.
And I may let people ask their own questions rather than fully interpret them, but I think Peter is asking how the binding of Isaac applies to humanistic Judaism. Is there?
This because the Hebrew Bible is part of our literary heritage, and it is part of it is an important source of it's an important part of how humanity has looked at the world. I see it as relevant in our discussions. I do not want to answer the question, and I have answered this a lot. Why is it important for humanistic Jews to study Bible? I will not answer that. If you're here at this talk, you think that it is at least mildly interesting. So I am not going to answer those kinds of questions. Okay. So if you have that kind of question, please don't ask it.
All right. Well, so I have a question myself about a theory that I've heard put out, which is that child sacrifice was practiced in the Near East in ancient times, and that the whole binding of Isaac and then God saying, don't do that, you can sacrifice this animal to me instead, was a metaphorical way of Jews actually being more humane. As disturbing as the story may be, it's a way to end child sacrifice, which was fairly widely practiced before that, to say, no, we are now overturning that really barbaric thing and just going, slightly barbaric by only sacrificing animals instead.
I think that that's what we would like to think, meaning I think that there is that speaks to the evolution of noble ideas. Like, we're not going to sacrifice our child, and now we're more evolved, and we're going to save our children. We're going to replace it. We're going to replace it with an animal instead. But the same author has a law code in which he talks about the sacrifice of firstborn children in the law code in Exodus in chapter 22. It talks about the sacrifice of firstborn children, and definitely during that period when this author saved Isaac, he wrote other stories where children were not saved, like the daughter of Jephthah, Yiftach, who is sacrificed because of a misspoken oath by her father. Meaning, this served a literary purpose. But I think seeing it through the moralistic lens of this is, how this idea developed and we Jews became elevated around this, I think is not a correct one, because Jews continue to see this story as as a model for child sacrifice. Right. Meaning they go ahead and sacrifice their children afterwards during the Crusades, right?
Yeah, right. Okay, great. Rather than kind of interpret the rest of the chat, we have a little bit of time if folks want to ask questions directly. If you just put your hand up, either using the icon at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to remove my spotlight and remove Tzemah spotlight so that we can see gallery. And Susan, do you want to unmute yourself and
Sure.
ask? Hi.
That question about why Eva's question about why Abraham could speak for other people, but not for his own son, really feels profound to me, just from my own experience. There really is a tendency sometimes for people to be so pious that they do what they think God wants, even at the expense of their children. And I know that was true in my family, my mother's family, very religious people who neglected their children. And it also comes up in Christianity. Jesus says to forget about your family, So I think it's a really profound question to ponder.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are not, despite this being like a very short story. This is what's actually quite amazing about this from a historical perspective, is just this short story has had such resonances in history, both literary and actually in the world of doing, that is actually amazing. This story is all of 19 verses long. It's you can tell the story in a minute, but it is a story that like deeply resonates and affects history, and causes, and the reason for that is because it is um, of the very deep notions that it grapples with, the notion of sacrificing yourself for something greater. Despite this being entirely abhorrent to me, that notion of killing my child, it is, I'm a skeptic, and so this I see. That's why the title of my book is "Why Abraham Murdered Isaac." I see it from an ethical perspective. It's an act of murder, but for others, it was an act of grappling with the big ideas. God is a character in the story, and God's relationship with Abraham is kind of, is it more important or less important than his relationship with his family?
I will also just say that having a foot in the atheist organizing world, this story is memeified on social media pretty regularly as, like if this happened today and someone tries to kill their kid because God told them to, you go to jail. Like, people think you're nuts. And yet it's still seen by, I think, a lot of very religious people in the world as the ultimate adhering to God's will. So it really is that a real inflection point of one of those stories where you read it and you're like, if you are of one mind, you're like, wow, what devotion, and of another mind, like, this is nuts. And how could anyone hold this up as a value? So I think
I
that's
mean, yeah, absolutely, Paul. And just like I haven't even touched on how this has resonated in the history of philosophy. Like, you have Kierkegaard writing Fear and Trembling. You have Derrida talking about Abraham's silence. This is not like yes, this story is absolutely horrible from our perspective, but it really, pushes you to, ask, to tackle, very, very profound ideas.
Carol.
I think one of the things we forget, some of the teachings of Hillel, for instance, if I'm not for myself, who am I for? Only for myself, what am I? And the idea of soldiers going to war and parents letting their children go to war, and we have to realize that the teachings have changed over the centuries, but we still have to think about whether we're for ourselves or we're for the community.
I thought of that also. I thought of that quote as well.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, as I said, it's despite this, and I say this, I repeat this as many times as I have to, despite the story being a horrible story, and maybe because the story is such a horrible story, it does force you to, to think at least about the notions of things that are greater than yourself. And for in the ancient world, God was omnipresent, and that was what they had to tackle is God my perceived notion of God more important than myself or my family? And often the answer is yes. We would answer it very, very differently, of course.
Alan.
I want to make two quick comments. First, or three. First, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. Secondly, maybe Abraham had evolved in his relationship with God and gained enough points with God by being obedient early on to be able to argue with him later. I think the same shows up in the story of Moses. And the last point, the last point is that I treat the stories in the Bible as the products of human culture, and they incorporate both positive and negative aspects of humanity, in my opinion. I choose to see the story of the Exodus as the most important story because it's about liberation from tyranny, which to me is the most important goal. But there are stories that are really horrible in the Bible, and they reflect horrible things about human nature. And I think we just have to accept that because it's a human product. Thanks again.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, it's this is the literary product of human imaginations, and as such, reflects some of the absolute horribleness that humans can perpetrate. We know this today, and they knew it in the ancient world as well. And yes, Abraham is a literary character in the Hebrew Bible, and definitely he evolves and he gains points, and thus is able to argue with God and with Sodom and Gomorrah. Definitely, it's not a monolithic, relationship. It's a developing literary relationship, and of course, and this is in some ways in chapter 22 is its climax.
There's some pretty horrible parts of the Exodus too, by the way. Stuart, nice to see you.
Hi, I'm thinking about being 7 or 8 years old, just starting Hebrew school. And they traditionally, I guess, when they go through the Bible, they start with Genesis, although I've heard it argued that that probably isn't the best place to start. And here you are hearing a teacher say very matter-of-factly, there is a God. God can talk to you. If God talks to you, you know it's God. And if you're asked to do something, don't bring your mind into it to figure out what's right or wrong, because God has just told you what to do. End of story. And you're hearing that when you're 7 or 8 years old. And it's really kind of shocking now to picture little Stu having heard that and bought into it and thinking that Abraham was this tremendous model of faith. And of course, that faith is important, which we later realize is not a great concept.
Yes, it is. I think that the idea, educating children to the idea that if God speaks to you, you should listen is not something that we should be perpetuating, of course. Considering everything, if you hear voices, you need to have medical attention. It's not a, I knew people, in my life, close friends who experienced this, and those people were people that really needed help. And so, no, absolutely not. To say this to a 7 or 8 year old, oh my gosh, like that's so horrible. So,
we have time, I think, for one more question if anyone wants to jump in. Otherwise, I will say thank you so much. That is really fascinating stuff. And I love the opportunity for us, even as humanistic Jews, to be able to look at our own liturgy and try to understand it through a multiple different lenses. And I found it fascinating. And I understand that there's a lot more that we could dive into on the depth of this, but hopefully we will have this series ongoing. There will be, it's the second Thursday of every month, so there'll be another rabbi joining us next month who I probably should have known in advance who that's going to be. You, Eva? We have Eva coming up, Eva Goldfink.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's next. Sorry, but if you are here, it means you're getting our emails. So we will keep you posted. This will go up on YouTube, and we will continue this. And I hope that we'll be able to have you back in the next cycle as well, because I know that we can go deeper on this, or we can go deeper on lots of other things as well. So this is really excellent. Thank you again, and thank you everybody
Thank you.
joining us.
Just let me one more word. If anybody has any questions about any of this, you are welcome to reach out to me at my congregational email, and I'm happy to engage you. So that is my offer.
And how can they get that email?
It's they can go to City Congregation's website, or remember Rabbi Tzemah at citycongregation.org.
I also appreciated the fact that you talked about Christianity and Islam as well as Judaism. Thank you for that.
Absolutely, Carol.
And buy the books. Tzemah won't tell you to do that, but
No,
I've got them on my shelf.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
April 11th, by the way, is Rabbi Adam Shalom. Oh yes, thank you, Jennifer, for writing that in the chat. So we'll have Adam Shalom with us next month. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.